This is a recording of the NMRA Coast Division virtual event, Saturday, February 6th, 2021. Good morning. Welcome to the NMRA-PCR Coast Division Saturday virtual event for February 26th. We're going to have basically today three items. First, just a little update on the division. And then Dave Connery is going to talk about his Sierra Carson Truckee Railroad, a pretty amazing layout that unfortunately reached its expiration date. But Dave will talk about that and his decisions. And finally, bring what you're modeling. Just very much for anyone who didn't see it last week, the Rails by the Bay has been formally canceled. There was actually really pretty exciting last week. The OPSIG had an event on the weekend. Congratulations to Seth and the team for putting together actually a great event. What was really good about that was that it really was a beginning of kind of the technology planning for the event. And I think one of the things that's exciting is I think this event will have a lot more interaction than a lot of the virtual events that we've had. One of the things that the team is really trying to do is make this as a convention where if you go, you'll have a lot of opportunity to interact with the other attendees. Still looking at February 20th, the decision date on the PCR in Fresno, and we'll wait until then. We should know that's right after right on our next meeting. So very briefly on the Coast Division elections, we had a long conversation at the board about whether to do our elections as a kind of in-person at a virtual event versus using the election buddy system the PCR uses. After talking about it for a long time, we decided that because we've normally had elections in a physical event only and only people who came to the physical event could vote, we didn't see a strong reason to adopt the election buddy on a long-term basis. After the pandemic, we'll probably come back the way we used to work. So the decision of the board was that for this election, we will have the election on our March 6th virtual event, which is the event we will have 4 weeks from today. It'll be the first item of business that day. We're also looking to try to have some good content so we maximize number of folks and we make sure we get a quorum. So that will be our in-person voting. And to my mind, that's just like voting at an event we would have had at the Elks Club or the Boy Scouts before the pandemic. What we're going to do is we're going to send out, Dave Connery's volunteered. We'll send out an email on February 20th. It'll come from me, but there will be instructions in that email that if you want to vote by mail, you can forward the email. That email, you just forward it to Dave Connery, and Dave will then add up all of those votes that he gets by mail, and we'll add them to the Saturday in-person total. So anyone who wants to vote by mail can vote by mail. If anyone wants to make a nomination for any of the positions, there are 3 positions. If you get those by February 20th, they'll be in the email, so they'll be on the ballot. And write-in candidates and nominations will be accepted. There'll be a place for write-in nominations, both in the mail-in ballot and opportunity during the elections for nominations at that time. The current nominated candidates are myself, Brian Booth, and Bob Ferguson, who are all currently in the roles and just continuing. So finally, my last point is just for anyone who's not a member, please join the NMRA. It's a great time. We've actually gotten a few new members and a few returning members recently. So with that, I'm going to throw it over to our e-clinic today, which is Dave Connery, and Dave's going to talk about his Sierra Carson Truckee Railroad. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and throw it over to Dave.
So, Phil,
I got to turn share on. I got to turn share on. I didn't do it. I'm going to have to edit all this out now. There we go. You should be good.
I'm getting some funny things. Hold on here. So, can you see that, Phil?
No, it's not sharing yet.
Huh. I mean, I have it on my screen.
Go ahead and stop sharing. And try again. So if you click on share, click on the upper left window, which is your desktop. Upper left, the upper left, the one where you see us in the video.
No, not the. Phil, I'm hitting everything I can on the upper left, but it doesn't seem to me.
Well, so did you hit the share screen first?
Where is that?
In the bottom on the center, there's a green thing.
That's what I failed to do. Okay.
Click share screen.
Right.
And then when that'll open a window, and in the upper left, you'll see the video, which, by the way, should have you on it right now. If it's, and double click on that or click on that and share. And that's your desktop. So then what we see, so we're seeing your desktop now.
Are you?
Yep.
Okay.
And I'm going to spotlight you for every way. Oh, no, we're not. We're not seeing your desktop. I'm sorry. Go ahead and hit it again. Hit share screen.
After you hit your screen, there should be another little button, blue button that says share. Sometimes people forget to hit that second button.
So hit share screen. It should open a window. There it is.
There we
got it. All right. And now you just throw your slideshow into slideshow mode and you're all set.
Okay.
Excellent.
Well, this is not going to actually be a review of my layout, but what I intend to do is just kind of share with you some of the why I modeled the railroad that I did, and some of the learnings that I had from that effort. So if you want to see my layout, if you Google YouTube and then Dave Connery, you'll get a chance to see an excellent video that John Abaticola put together of TSG Multimedia, and I think it well portrays the layout that I built. And so I won't be doing that here. So how did I get started on what I did? I built a layout. It was like a 5x9 tabletop layout. And about that time, I read the book on the Sierra Railway by Dorothy Dean. And I thought, oh, wow, that's a great railroad. That's what I'll call my railroad. And I started to pick out a couple of towns and name them after towns on the Sierra. And about that time, I read The Silver Short Line by Worm and DeMoro, and I thought, well, this is another great railroad. I'd really like to model this railroad. But I was between, I got rid of the layout that I had because I moved, and I was living in an apartment for about a year and a half. And that was actually, although I was disappointed at the time, it gave me an opportunity to do a lot of thinking, and that really helped. Because during that time, I had a couple chances to visit Jack Burgess's layout. And quite honestly, I was gobsmacked. I had never really thought about modeling a railroad exactly the way Jack does. In fact, of course, I never did that. But just the idea of building your whole model around what actually existed as a real railroad really thrilled me. And so I spent a lot of time getting a lot of typo maps and planning out how that railroad would work. And I try to combine the two railroads. In the Sierra book, there's a paragraph where the author talks about how the Sierra had approached the V&T about building a railroad over the Sierra between the Sierra and the V&T and connecting and making another crossing of the Sierra. When you look at topo maps, you say those guys were crazy. Their idea of going over Mono Pass was quite impossible. There had been a huge amount of tunneling involved. But what I did discover is that it might be possible to build a railroad over Carson Pass, following basically California Highway 88. And so that was the concept behind my railroad, extending the Sierra and the V&T to meet coming over Carson Pass. So a little bit of some philosophy about layouts. I think everybody needs should build a layout that fits their desires and their modeling. And we're all, there's a lot of different ways to do model railroading, and almost everybody is a collector to some extent, but some people, that's their primary interest, and I really appreciate that. They become collectors and often dealers. So that's one type maybe, and then another is a person that just enjoys seeing trains run. And then a third category would be model builders, and then operators, and each of those would have a very different layout. I think a collector might have a layout that maybe they got 20 tracks around their turntable so that they can display all of their steam locomotives, or large yards, and they wouldn't have any hidden trackage because they're a collector. They want people to see what they've collected, so everything would be out where you can see it. A runner might have a layout that many of us would call a bowl of spaghetti. I can remember one year we had a PCR convention down in Bakersfield, and on the layout tours, we were out near, well, anyway, we were on a layout tour, and we visited a guy's house, and he had this large room. Maybe it was a two-car garage. I can't remember. But it was a large room just filled with trains everywhere. And he had like an operator's console in the center, and he was sitting there, excuse me. And while we were there, I think at one time he got 10 trains running on that layout. And he was laughing. He was having such a good time. I don't think I've ever seen anybody enjoy their layout as much as he was enjoying that while we were kind of watching in kind of amazement. And it turns out he was actually an animator for Hanna-Barbera cartoons, but his layout was a perfect layout, I think, for his interest. A model builder might build a layout that again has a high percentage of structures and scenery to trackage. Build the model in a way that there's a lot of room to do a lot of building of models. While an operator would certainly try to form their layout based on how a railroad would operate, and so would have incorporated in it such things as hidden staging on both ends, and typical length passing sidings, and all those things that those of us who were at the SIG meet last week probably were talking about. So, but my philosophy here is build a layout that you're going to enjoy. It's for you. It's not for anybody else. So a little bit about the good, bad, and the ugly. One thing, prepare a hospitable space for your layout. When I started this layout, I'd already built a couple other layouts, but when I started this layout, I spent more than a year just getting the space ready, building walls, insulating the ceiling, putting in a pocket door, sealing it off so that virtually no dust could get into it, putting it was half of a two-car garage, putting wood floor down on top of the concrete, and then carpeting and padding on top of that so that it was a very comfortable space to work in, piping my house heating and air conditioning into the room so that I could maintain the environment. I highly recommend that. That was time well spent. It was hard not to want to get into building the layout, but I'm glad I took the time to do that. And the next thing is following conventional wisdom. And I don't think that's always wise because conventional wisdom, as I was just talking about, it may be somebody else's conventional wisdom. So a lot of things that other people might find right might not be right for you. The idea of using multiple levels, increasing layout size. I really believe in this. I would the next layout I would build would have multiple levels on it again. I was able to just about double the size of my layout with using 2 levels, and that gave me a whole lot more opportunity to build railroad. Using helix to save space. Helix do save space, but I think they're a terrible idea. I had a standard gauge helix that was, well, by the way, in multiple levels, you know, you're going to find that your lower level's too low and your upper level's too high. That's, I think everybody finds that. There was an article by Jack Burgess in, I think it was in Craftsman, while I was starting to build my layout, and where he went through the engineering of deciding what the levels should be, considering the height of your eyes. Could you see all the way to the back and see equipment at the back of the lower level without having to duck your head under to look underneath it, and those kind of things? Well, I wound up with 20 inches of space between my upper and lower level. Seems like a lot, but it did provide a lot of space on the lower level for people to see everything clearly, the entire scene. But when the train would go into the helix, it would be gone. It seemed like it, you know, it would never come out. It would take. So eventually I just never used the helix. I ran trains on the upper level and the lower level, and that was a waste of space then, they have in the helix. I wouldn't do that a second time. Developing a metal plan and sticking with it. One of the problems that a lot of us have is that we'll pick up the latest issue of Model Railroader and see some idea and say, oh, wow, I got to put that in my layout. I'll change this over here, or I'll put it instead of that. You'll never finish your layout if you keep changing it. You need to come up with a plan and a concept and stick with it and build it. One of the things that I did around 1995, we were getting ready for started to plan for the 2000 NMRA convention in San Jose. And as we were doing that, I said, okay, well, there's a lot of things I want to get done on my layout, because I wanted to have my layout open on the tours. So I developed a Gantt chart, which is a chart that you can plan things and show interactions of projects and things. It's a project planning chart. But I had it in Excel, and I had a big chart that I printed out the parts and hanging on my wall of my garage. And I would track getting all the projects done. Well, I had all these projects to do. And in fact, ultimately, I did them all. But it was about 2006 by the time I got around to doing them, not on the deadline of getting it done by 2000. But anyway, that did help me keep me focused when I go out and see on the list that there was a project that really should get done next. And rather than doing something fun, I try to do that. And then finally, the idea of deadlines. I'm a big believer that if you schedule things like an operating session or an open house at here at Coast Division or in a convention, a PCR convention or something, those deadlines you'll really be motivated to get a lot done in anticipation of that. And that helps keep you on a huge project like a layout. And a layout is a project that could be measured in terms of decades, really. You need those little short-term deadlines to keep progress moving along well. So, couple things. One, this is what I use for support. It's not my idea. Actually, Jim Heidegger wrote an article about it in an early model railroader. This is the over on the left. This is Tuolumne City. This is the West Side Lumber Mill, and then on the upper part, this is Gold Hill on the V&T, and this is the Crown Point Trestle. But when you tear it, kind of open it up and see, the way I supported these peninsulas, and I had two of them, is I built this, it's kind of square on the bottom, holds the bottom, and then the X-brace, whoops, oh shit, how do we go back?
I think you want to hit previous, but you can use your back arrow on your keyboard too.
Thanks. That's what I'll do. Thought that was a back arrow. No.
You may need to hit your mouse off to get that. Hit your mouse on the slides, somewhere on the slides. There you go.
Oops. There I am. Okay, thanks. Thank you, Phil. I'm really not very good at this. Anyway, the idea is you got a lot of support here, but it's really thin. You can hardly see in the behind this mill here on the left. You can hardly see the support because I painted them flat back, and they're really narrow. They're really wasp waisted, but it's very solid. And in fact, and the other peninsula, those of you who remember Denise Showalter, who sadly passed away, she was helping by painting the scenery on the upper level on the wall, and she would on work days would climb up. I'd set a ladder up, and she would climb up and sit up there. And she was a big lady, and it was perfect support for her. So that's an idea if you're thinking about a freestanding peninsula on a 2-level layout, how you might want to do it. As you went into my room, I had a lift out that I never lifted out really once I got it built. But this is the door over on the left. You can see the edge of the door. This is a pocket door, and I had the scenery painted right over the door. I had 2 bridges going across. This is the Truckee River. This first one was this sort of a lattice bridge. When I wanted to do this was actually, I was modeling 1929, and this bridge was the bridge in use up until 1891. But I loved the bridge. There's one picture of it, so I said, okay, I'll build it from that picture. But I was concerned, it's 150 scale feet across there, and I thought, how am I ever going to build a bridge that's actually going to support the weight of my trains on the bridge? And the trains, this train's an old brass train, brass cars and brass locomotive. It weighs quite a bit. What I did was I bought some square brass tubing, and I bought a couple of pieces, and then a piece that would fit just fit inside the brass tubing, the next size down. And I put that together so that it all total was 150 scale feet, and soldered that all up. And I had one on each side. And then I laminated on top of that like a 1x12 wood and stained wood. And actually the bottom I just painted the bottom black because nobody could get their head down to see up underneath it anyway. But it looked to all the world like it was a wood girder, but it never that bridge was in place 28 years. It never sagged even the slightest bit. So that was a pretty good solution to that problem. Another little thing at that scene over on the right here, you can see the SP crossing of the Truckee. And my friend Al Massey worked with me and actually did a lot of the work to get, we put in a swing, well, little kids swinging on a swing by using a Hankscraft motor that swung it back and forth, and I could turn it on, and the kid would swing back and forth. And that was always a feature, particularly of young people when they saw the kids playing on the swinging on the tire underneath the bridge. One of the things I tried to do was try to include a couple of scenes that people might recognize. One of them was my scene of Reno, where I had the sign that a lot of people have seen, one or more signs. It's changed over the years, but the sign that said the greatest little city in the world, and looking right down Virginia Street. And this is like a 5-foot deep scene right here. But almost everybody that came could remember that and remarked about that particular scene. Another scene on the lower level was the Roundhouse in Turntable at Jamestown, which I modeled completely. And many people had been up to Railtown 1897, had seen that, and so were familiar with that scene. So by having a couple scenes that people would recognize, I think a lot of people identified with the layout when they came for visits. I also tried to include a couple things that I thought were kind of unique, and one of them was flume. I hadn't really seen flumes modeled on model railroads, although they were pretty common back in the day. And there was a flume system that brought wood from the Tahoe Basin up over Spooner Summit and down to Carson City. And there it was loaded into cars and hauled up to Virginia City as mining timbers and as cordwood for the boilers. And so that became a big business, a big part of the mining effort up at Virginia City. And so I modeled that, and it turned out pretty good. And again, I had a lot of remarks about it because it was a scene that most people had not seen on other model railroads. A couple of scenes that were special to me. One of them was the passenger depot in Sonora, a very unique building. There was some great drawings of this building in Narrow Gauge and Short Line Gazette. A lot of the buildings, as it turned out, a lot of the buildings on my two levels were actually included in drawings by Gary Caviglia that appeared in the Gazette. In this, actually, there was 3 sets of drawings of this particular building by Bob Thowd and by Gary Caviglia, and so I used those to model it. But I really always enjoyed this scene. It include, of course, the passengers depot and the standard lumber company buildings that were around behind it, and then the freight depot there in Sonora. Another, to me, a critical scene was the Carson City engine house. That was on the upper level and on the end of the peninsula, and oops, I don't know what that was. Not me. Anyway, but this was a project that I kept putting off because I had never really done anything near this big or using these techniques. Ultimately, I wound up casting a bunch of wall sections. There are probably about 14 different wall sections on the fronts, the sides. These were cast. Each one of these is individual, and then I melded them together, glued them together. But I cast all these out of hydrocal. This is the back side with the atrium in the back, and this is the front. I had to shrink it a lot. The actual engine house at Carson City was 11 stalls. I modeled 8 stalls, and the total length, I cut to 43% of the total length, and it was still huge. And at one point, I had gotten photos that a photographer had taken of the inside of the building, and I was going to model the complete inside. And then I realized if I did that, the only way you'd see it is to lift off the roof. And if you lift off the roof, where the heck are you going to put a roof that size in the layout? There was no room to set such a thing down. You'd wind up just holding it. So I ultimately decided to attach the roof permanently and not do the interior. I tried to have little mini scenes. I tried to set it so I walk around the layout. If anywhere I was standing, I could see a mini scene. And some of them were like this over on the left here, this track crew that was putting a new siding alongside the engine house in Carson City in an adjacent little cold delivery location. And then on the lower level, I bashed together a couple of fine scale miniatures. I think Baringold's Tannery and the Sawyer Chemical Company into a complex that I called Hershey's. Hershey's built the plant in Oakdale in 1960. I'm modeling 1929. But I thought maybe this was what it would look like if they had built it in 1929. And so I'm showing a kind of a shift change here with all of the candy workers coming and leaving and entering the factory. And then in the Oakdale area, there are a couple things. One, there were 2 depots in Oakdale. The Southern Pacific Depot, we're looking at the picture over on the left, is this yellow gray roof depot, and then the Santa Fe Depot is the tile roof depot more to the left in that photo. They're about 3 blocks. They were about 3 blocks apart. Actually, the SP Depot is still there in town. It's now the Cowboy Museum in Oakdale. They were about 3 blocks apart. I didn't have that kind of room, so I put them kind of almost kitty corner from each other. But it did give me a chance to build those 2 buildings. And then another fun project was a Hershey. Hunt's has a plant in Oakdale, and I used 3 different kits to combine into a single complex. A couple of Campbell's kits and a Builders and Scale kit. Well, that's the end of my presentation. That's the end of the layout. This is what the layout looked like on July 12th, this past summer when I took the layout down. You can still see some of the painting on the wall, and the room was just about ready to come apart. I was tearing the wallboard off at the time. Like Jesse had mentioned earlier, the reason I wanted to be the one. I'm almost 81. I wanted to be the one that takes it down, and at this age, you never know how long you're going to have. So I thought the pandemic was a good chance. I had actually planned on being open for the 2020 PCR convention in Concord. I was really disappointed when that couldn't happen. And I decided, well, I'm not going to wait for another one. I'm going to take it down, and I'm glad I did. It's given me the freedom to move on to some other projects that I'm finding equally exciting. And I had helped widows with three of my friends' layouts, taking them apart, and I often would joke that you know, when it came time, when something happened to me, my wife would probably call the disposal company to get a garbage bin. The call before she dialed 911 to get the emergency people that are coming to see me. But I like I say, I really am glad that I was the one and didn't leave that for someone else to handle. So if you got any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. I guess everybody's muted. They probably can't speak.
Well, so Dave, you had some wonderful structures on that layout. Where did they end up?
I gave everything away. There's two young modelers. They're not NMRA members, I don't believe. One models the Sierra and one models the V&T. I've known them since they were about 15 or 16. Mentored the Sierra modeler a lot over the years. And so I invited both of them to come over and then take anything they wanted off their part of the layout. So one had his a chance to take anything off the upper level, and the other the lower level. And then I'm in a round robin modeling group, and I just invited them over one at a time. This was during the pandemic. Just come over, and then anything that was left on the layout to take it. Ultimately, I found by giving it away, I found a home for everything on the layout. I think I have just a couple of little structures or something left on the shelf.
That's great. Thanks.
Well, thank you all for your time. I appreciate it very much.
Well, before you go, Dave, let's add, so if you had it to do over again, so, you know, that's always the interesting question. What are the 2 or 3 things that you would do differently now that you know, looking back on the whole experience, what are the 2 or 3 things you would do differently?
Well, I still love those 2 railroads. So I'd still have a 2-level layout. I'd model the 2 railroads. I would not build helixes between them. I had both a 2-track standard gauge helix and a single HON3 helix because I did have some HON3 track on both levels. So that is one thing that I would do differently. The second thing is I would leave out a couple of, I would force myself to leave out a couple of scenes. I had too many scenes too close together. Typically, you know, a train, the locomotive is entering one town when the caboose is just leaving the town behind it. They were just too close together. So I would give myself a little bit more room. But it really gave me a lot of great opportunities for modeling projects.
Cool.
Dave, can you explain your rationale behind your Hershey's plant? I really like that model. It's super cool with all the people in white on the shift change. How did you come up with a design for that? Did you just totally freelance it, or did you look at old chocolate plants, or how'd you come up with that?
I totally freelanced it. I had those 2 fine scale miniatures kits. And I didn't have any use for them, and I had a space set aside for the Hershey plant, and then I just put them together into a single complex, and it turned out pretty well. I was happy with it. It was a lot of people would mention it. I used for the signs. I used Hershey wrappers that I cut out the words for to put up on the wall. So that's. But it was totally freelance, and that was a lot of fun to do.
I grew up in Modesto, and we used to go tour the Hershey plant when it was in there, and it was always the highlight of the school year to go.
Right,
fishing.
Sure, yeah.
Good thing you didn't live in Golden, Colorado, because the highlight of it would have been touring the Coors Brewery. Different childhoods for different people. I'm sorry. Well, thanks, Dave. That was absolutely wonderful. I think it's great to learn, especially for those that are thinking and planning layouts, to learn from other folks. So, if there are no other questions, we'll go ahead and formally move on to kind of show what you're modeling.
Hey, Phil.
Yes,
this
sir.
is Jack.
Yes.
Yeah. Hey, I just wanted to make a comment on what Dave said, the thing he made mention of there, that he's getting up in age, and he's the one who wanted to tear his layout down. In my organization, South Bay Historic Railroad Society, we get people calling us all the time with donations, family members, wives and stuff like that. And they'll donate the husband's or father's layout to us, but we end up having to go in and tear it down. And a lot of times those things are built not to come down. So you go in with a saw and start cutting up. So kind of think of that as you're working on your layout. How's it going to come out? Just a comment from me.
Well, and not just the layout. I think also things like, when you place a building, you don't necessarily think that you're going to take it out, but you've got to remember at some point it probably will come out. It's not going to be a permanent part of the world at that location.
Exactly.
So, exactly. Thinking through a little bit of can I or someone in the future take this out and keep it in one piece is probably an interesting thought process.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, Phil, I was able to remove that. I had that Carson City engine house on about a 4x4 piece of homosote underneath, and I was able to take it out in a single piece and ultimately give it to the young man that models the VNT.
Well, that's cool.
Yeah, I just want to point out, I was 74 when I was faced with building a new layout after there was a ceiling leak and a collapse in a roof. And I certainly cut back and just am building a place to display models rather than trying to go for an operational layout in a very small space I had anyway. But you think, in thinking about how I was going to build it, I was thinking, I made sure that everything was literally, you could be moved out and would make it through the door.
Yep.
Yeah, hey, Dave, I'd just like to comment. I was one of those people that walked through the door and saw your layout at the 2000 convention. I was getting back into the hobby at the time, and it was very inspirational. I remember many of those scenes like it was yesterday.
Thank you, Jim.
Fantastic modeling. And second question is, that last slide showed a nice wire hanging from the ceiling. Did you take a swing on that like the kid on the swing?
Yeah, maybe it was still alive at the time. Probably not.
So the real important question is, what replaced that space in your garage? Did you get a new car or?
No, it's just workspace now.
Ah.
And I'm part of an effort, and maybe in a couple 3 months we'll have something to display here. An effort to build the San Ramon branch in N scale.
Oh,
a portable.
Cool.
You're lucky, unlucky to be in N scale because with those Type 18 kits in HO that came out, you can just do every station now.
Well, actually, I have a cricket machine, and after Ray Davis's presentation a couple of months ago, I've actually created the Type 18 depot in cricket, and so I can, and I have cut out a couple 3 of the depots.
Cool. That's good.
Yeah, I was going to say the deconstruction part there, Dave, is that the pandemic forced me, well, I shouldn't say forced me, but gave me the opportunity to do a lot of construction on the Pink Lady. So I did a lot of ripping out too. You know, those people that say screw from underneath up into risers, you know, they really do know what they're talking about, you know. But I found removing a lot of stuff, the Sawzall was really handy. And I've still got big chunks of the railroad sitting in the garage, and I'm trying to figure out where to put them. So, you know, a lot of times what you think you might want to save may not be possible, you know, 10 years, 20 years from now. So just have fun building, enjoy while you can, you know.
One of the things I did, you might find interesting, instead of L girder, I used what I call T girder. And instead of just a girder with access on one side, I put a It's on top of a 1x4, I put a 1x3 with 1 inch overhanging on each side. And that way I could screw up in from either the front side or the back side, depending on which was most convenient. And I found that handy on a number of occasions when I had other things in the way, so that only one side really was a good screwing location.
I think the rule that I'm abiding by this time, I'm still working on staging, is that if it will never be covered, a screw from above is fine. If it has a possibility of being covered, there will be no screws going in from the top. So.
Great idea. I'm rebuilding a fence that was 25 years ago.
Steve, you're really muffled. I think you've got to get closer to your mic. Your mic may be covered or something.
Never mind.
There, that's better now.
Oh, okay. I'm rebuilding a fence that's on one side of the house for various reasons. I'm using screws, and I'm finding it a lot better that way, because as pieces rot, you can replace just the pieces you want to. So, and it's also easier on your shoulders because you're not hammering, you know. And so I've learned to love screws, you know, and for assembling and disassembling fences and stuff. Anyway, it fits in with your layout stuff. You never know when you build a fence if you're going to be around 20 years from now and have to rebuild it. So I'm finding that all the pressure treated stuff is salvageable, and I've only had to replace 2 or 3 of the posts. And but the rest of it I'm replacing with pressure treated. I'm reusing the lumber. At $7 a piece of board for the fence these days, I'm glad to be able to do that. Plus, I'm going up 1.5 feet to give my neighbor more privacy. Long story, but screws even outside are a great thing. You know, for rebuilding in the future, especially.
Yeah. One thing I found in just doing my little tiny layout was that poplar wood really looks good, and it almost gives you a furnished effect with just a basic L girder. Oh, and it's easily it's readily available in Home Depots and other wood stores. They have all sorts of sections of it. Anyway, instead of just using pine.
I had another question for Dave. I wanted to know how you balance building models with building the layout. What sort of a balance you created with that? Because I find myself, you know, building models and taking forever to do something, and then the layout construction stops. Did you have a scheme for moving forward?
Well, Guy, actually, I would not allow myself to build a model until I'd finished another item on the layout. I just had that rule, so I forced. Okay, I've done that particular section over there. Now I can build this boxcar. And then when I do that, it's time to go back and get the next job on the layout, just to try to discipline myself. Otherwise, I really enjoy building freight cars. I might spend all of my time doing just that.
Sounds like discipline that I may not have, but.
Well, I don't know that I have much discipline. That's why I made those silly rules. But I think discipline is really critical if you're ever going to finish a layout.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That's an interesting thought of, it becomes a lot more like work when you're doing a bunch of things you don't like so you can do things you do like.
Yeah.
It's an interesting thought process of balancing that. Coming back, I think, to Dave's comments about different kinds of modelers. Sometimes I think expectations of others drive us to do things that, you know, you're not like Dave where you just say, I just want a place to show my models versus trying to build a full layout and have operations on it. I mean, those are kind of, if you're more into building models, sometimes feeling that the pressure to build a full layout may be less enjoyable than just building models and having a place to store to show them.
I think it's very interesting, Dave's comment, this concept of finished your layout. Strange concept.
And actually that may be an objectionable concept, because I've heard that when you finish your layout, they put you in the narrow motel and the groundhog becomes your mailman. But I had a couple of comments, and I'm working on trying to put together some photographs to share my current project, which is building the Oregon City Bridge into Winchester, Virginia, which obviously does not exist. But that idea of following the conventional wisdom, I think that's a lesson for me anyhow, that has come very, very late in life. I'm now 80, and thanks to Jim Radke and Steve Van Meter and a group of other guys, including Seth Newman, I think all of them dug their way out of the cuckoo's nest. I have a layout with two helixes, and I think I'm now into at least the 13th year of finding out how to build a layout. I wish we'd have had this Zoom thing 10 years ago. I might be done.
Good to see you today, Bob.
Yeah.
I was going to say, one thing I've discovered as I get older, and I think I'm approach this as a young dad with, well, not so young dad, but a dad with two young kids. And I would go and buy the cheapest, least expensive thing that I could find, including the lumber and everything else. And I've truly enjoyed just going down to Ashby Lumber and saying, I want 20 of these. And some guy goes with a forklift and comes back with 20 of them and shoves them in my car, you know? So I have to admit, I'm truly enjoying that part of the hobby now.
Well, one of the things, my layout, parts of it was like 34, 35 years old. And things would go wrong. And as I got older, I found it harder and harder to fix them. I'd crawl under the layout and have a great deal of trouble getting myself in the position to do the soldering that I needed to do. And when I'd get done and crawl out, I'd realize that I now created two new problems in fixing the one problem that I had. And so just maintaining the layout became more and more onerous as time went on. So I guess another learning is I never thought I'd get to here. I never thought about what it was going to be like when I got older. And it, you know, going back, I'd say, okay, I needed to think how I do things in a way that's going to be a lot easier to maintain them when I'm not as agile as I was when I started.
And I think the other challenge that a layout of the age that yours had was it went through some probably fairly major technology transitions from DC to DCC, right. How we think about doing wiring, how we think about, you know, and then the advent of thinking about trying to do operations, which, you know, if a layout's 30, 35 years old, you got to think about that. That means it was started back in the 80s. And you got to think about how different the 80s and even the 90s was versus today, because so much changed between 95 and about 2005, 2010 in the hobby. And so a lot of those layouts there's a lot of retrofitting, which makes them even more complex. If you start from scratch today, I think with today's technology, and, you know, I think Seth was talking about was, you know, using structured wiring. You know, you can use structured wiring now in ways that eliminate a lot of those issues that it kind of showed up because you took something that was kind of designed analog and tried to make it digital. So.
Yeah, the layout underwent, you know, it was originally built it started in the 80s, in late 80s, it was all DC. And then I started to convert to the Keller onboard system. That was very resistance sensitive. So I wound up using my bus line. It was either a number 6 or number 8 gauge wire for my main bus to eliminate the resistance loss. Well, of course, then later on, as I converted first to Digitrax and then later to North Coast, that bus was way over gauged.
Right. Well, and the fact that it was a parallel bus probably introduced all sorts of interesting anomalies on the DCC signal too.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So it's really interesting that it's kind of your layout reflects a point in time, and adapting it's kind of is often a challenge. So.
Yeah, Phil, I totally agree with that. I actually think when you start a layout, you are sort of reflective of the technology that's available at that moment.
Right.
And that, there's a few upgrades, like you say, you can kind of do, but then you're kind of stuck, unless you want to go through and do a lot of extra work to redo stuff. And if you're building a big layout, that's not really an option.
Right.
Exactly. And it's even changing more, depending upon your view, whether this is one of the things Seth and I was talking about, I think there's going to be an interesting philosophical view of layout construction of this concept of star wiring, where you basically run cheap Cat5 cables out to everything and bring it all back to a central location where you have your intelligences. Or the other option, which is the LCC system, which is you run a bus around the layout and you have all these little smart nodes out on the bus. And both have advantages and disadvantages, but I think there's a really interesting philosophical question coming. If you're building a layout today, which one of those two strategies do you choose? And I think they're not mutually exclusive per se, but there's really an interesting, and it's a technology question about how much you centralize intelligence versus distributing it out on a bus. Because once you put it on a bus, then you've got to troubleshoot the bus, and it makes the troubleshooting more difficult. It makes installation easier in some ways, but makes troubleshooting more difficult. But using Cat5 defined wiring, what we're doing in Pleasanton is we've actually defined the Cat5 cables, so everything will run back to 3 locations with single Cat5 cables. There's no intermediate terminations anywhere. You basically come off of the outputs, either Chubb or the CP node, and run a Cat5 cable right to the to the target on a signal or to the turnout. And so under the layout, there's no terminations whatsoever. There's just the endpoints and the computer equipment. So that's kind of a star wiring versus running the DCC bus and an LC bus around under the tracks and putting intelligence out in little blocks everywhere. I think it's a really interesting question if you're thinking about designing a layout with what I'll call the modern capabilities. So something Seth and I were talking about. Yeah, sorry, Ken.
You might also think that in 5 years, all of that will be obsolete with dead rail.
But you still have to have this for signaling and turnout control and detection.
Yeah,
and those
that's
things.
true.
That's it's almost more for that than the bus power, than the track power. But yeah, and in fact, Seth and I were talking about maybe trying to put a session together about that as a topic for the convention about, if you're starting a layout today, this choice you have of technology, because there's one set of technologies in the telecom industry that's great about wiring. There's another set of technologies coming out of the model railroad industry about distributed intelligence. And by the way, this is a battle that happens in high tech. Do you push intelligence out to the edge or do you run it in the cloud? It's a huge battle in technology of where you put stuff. And I think it's an interesting choice for us now as model railroaders.
We went through
I was going to say, what Ken is saying and what you're basically saying here is if you're building a layout, I don't know about anybody else, but my layout has the great unfinished has been going on for decades. I just took out like a third of the layout and put in new trackage and that sort of stuff. It's upgrading. And how do you upgrade? And what are you upgrading to?
Yep.
And that sort of stuff. And that's what is really reflecting of the state of the hobby today. I would never obviously upgrade to a DC system.
Right.
But, but I'm locked into maybe this or maybe that from 10 years ago when I did a last thing. So that's something that if you talk about build layout design, you have to sort of think ahead to upgrading.
Yep.
You try to future-proof. I mean, the communications industry has spent an awful lot of time dealing with that, as Phil kind of outlined. So, we share, well, along with Charlie and Dave, I guess for that matter, several of us, long careers in an industry that's grappled with this for as long as I've been involved, and in the commercial world, you're kind of dominated by labor costs. So we don't mind throwing a little extra wire at something if it saves us from having to roll a truck to go out and deal with it, because that's hundreds of dollars. I mean, that was hundreds of dollars even in the 80s. Whereas a model railroader might consider that entertainment. So, there are somewhat different objectives here, but all of us, looking at this screen are not of the age that we like to crawl around under things a lot. It's first of all, there's a lot of thinking about how we're going to get back up once we've gotten down.
Well, and I think so the other thing too is that as you complete your layout, the amount of maintenance you have to do is directly proportional to the level completed, right? So if you complete 50% of the layout, you have X amount of maintenance you have to do on that. If you complete another 25%, your maintenance goes up by 50%. And I think that was kind of what Dave was commenting on was, eventually the maintenance load becomes a challenge. So I think that's important when you start thinking about a layout today, to really think through, well, when I get this done, what's it going to take to maintain it? How challenging is it going to be to maintain it? Because I have a funny feeling, if you talk to a lot of modelers who've completed or built big layouts, that may be a discussion that is significant. Just the amount of maintenance and how much time it takes to keep it running once you get it completed. And so maybe the thought process of choosing technologies and implementation methodologies to minimize maintenance might be actually a good strategy for long-term enjoyment. They were just thought processes.
Hey, Phil, you forgot the third category, prototypical wiring. If you're doing 1960s, you shouldn't have anything that wasn't around in 1960. My second thing is I challenge.
We don't allow any cell phones in the layout room because damn, they didn't exist in 1960.
Can we use punch blocks in 1960
to come up with a wireless thing that works in the next 2 or 3 years that I can focus on? So
yeah, we gave Dave Adams a hard time about the computer generated switch list for his layout.
And by the way, talking about some nice surprises. So we're for the layout in Pleasanton, we're doing signaling. We bought all of these custom signals, and it turns out they were made for Atlas, and all the signals, the heads, which have 3 LEDs in each one because they're searchlights, basically are wired to an RJ14 jack, which is the 6-pin jack with 4 pins. And it's wired, black is ground, and then the red, yellow, and green wires are wired to the LEDs. So when you come down to actually building the layout, we're going to build a board, and talking to Seth about getting these built. Basically, you have a board that's got an RJ45 on one side, and on the other side has 2 of these RJ14s. And the idea is you just plug the signals into that, plug in the RJ45, the other end plugs into the CRMRI, and you're done. So literally, there's no soldering under the layout. There's no wiring under the layout. There's no screws under the layout. It's all plug and play.
Right, and you avoid having to deal with little fiddly bits of 30 gauge magnet wire, which
exactly.
Is lots
oh
of
my
fun.
God! But you lose all the entertainment value.
Hanging out of the layout with a soldering iron and having solder drip in your face.
That's right, Jesse. Real men like solder in their face. But I really don't mind soldering, but I really don't like it near my eyes.
And to some extent, having been in technology for a lot of years, and actually the book I wrote, there's a chapter about where you put intelligence in distributed systems, and it actually is very fundamental. The concept of these distributed little intelligence nodes on a bus, I think is pretty questionable. The cost of wiring from where the intelligence, where the action needs to be back to a point of centralized intelligence on our layouts with Cat5 cable is so inexpensive. I think the complexity of distributing things and having to troubleshoot them in that distributed network may be much more than it's worth. And I think it's a really interesting, and the whole LCC technology, it's really cool, but it kind of feels to me a lot like pushing more intelligence down to your PC. When you look at today, you know, like the intelligence that's recording this conference is not on my PC. It's up in the cloud. It's running in a server out in the internet somewhere. So it's been centralized, and we're using the network to get us all back to it. So it's kind of, it's a really interesting philosophical discussion about how you do this. So
to pick that up, let me add one more thing. A lot of the, and you know, what we're dealing with here to some extent are, it's beyond philosophical. It's more theological. And in the early days of the internet, you have to realize this was originally the ARPANET, and the ARPANET was designed to develop a survivable communication system so that if somebody nuked a couple of your nodes, quite literally, the rest of them would be able to route around the damage and you could still launch a counterstrike. Now, that's really important if you're SAC. It's not very important in your basement. And what happened is that concept kind of rolled into a lot of people who were very suspicious of central network operators, and in some countries you can imagine why. But in our case, it was just people who didn't like AT&T and MCI, and they wanted intelligence out at the nodes where they could control it. But I mean, kind of what Phil is saying is, in your basement, you control it. So if you don't trust you to manage your network, you got bigger problems than distributed intelligence.
And so I'm going to argue. Now I'm all a buzz here. We're going to be gone for an hour now, Seth. But I'd argue the other way. I'd argue for divide and conquer, right? The idea of the distributed intelligence means I can have intelligence on one corner of the layout. It controls just a few devices. I can isolate it from the rest of the layout. I can debug it, test it, and I've only got a few things to debug, as opposed to a central point of failure. So
yeah,
I
but
just
that means
that
you have to debug it in 10 places if you have 10 nodes. I mean, the average user, you know, it's all he can do to use JMRI on a centralized system. And I mean, it's wonderful that you could have distributed intelligence, but having a 10-node distributed layout basically means that 10 nodes each have to have their own individual model of the world. Now, it can be a little simple. They're only concerned about their direct connections, but you have 10 of them, no two alike. And that's asking, you know, people who don't have sophisticated network management tools a lot to go out to 10 different nodes and manage them individually. I think it's much simpler for a real-world modeler to log into JMRI once and do it from one place. And at that point, LCC versus CMRI versus LocoNet becomes a matter of plumbing, and you don't really care. So just centralize it and do it once. Everything's easy to get to. You can have one place where the backboard's at a convenient height and you're not on your knees, a convenient distance and you're not constantly doing this. One management tool, you know.
Except that I'd argue about that single point of failure too, right? You got a single point of failure, and when it's down, the whole layout's down.
Yeah, but so what? If one of your nodes is down, you're screwed up your operating system session anyway. And it's not like, you know, the Russians are going to get a leaker through and blow up New York. It just means, you know, you have to go fix a node.
Well, I think the other thing that's really interesting is you've got to differentiate the DCC track wiring from any signaling or what I'd call control wiring. And what's interesting, so we're going through this DCC rebuild in Pleasanton. And the original thought was to put a DCC bus around the layout. And the more we looked at that, we realized the minute you put detectors in, and we're using the Chubb has a 12-port, a 12-slot kind of motherboard for detectors. If you're doing 12 detectors and you look at a location and you look at kind of the footprint for 12 detectors, and because we've got two main lines, you've got to have separate detectors for each main line because we want to drop back to DC. So they have to be isolated on two different motherboards. So what that means is if you take an area in the layout, you're putting 24 detectors essentially in a location. And if you look at the footprint of those detectors around, turns out it's about 15, 20 feet in either direction. And it doesn't make sense to have a bus. It makes much more sense to actually make those star wired also. So essentially what we've got is the locations where we've got the CRMI equipment. We're also putting a booster. And then we're putting circuit breakers there and then running an individual feed out to one of those detector panels and then starring out. So again, it's all a star.
But it's not a single star, Phil. That's the point. It's hierarchy, right? Well, you've broken it down into a collection of stars.
Sure,
right.
But it's structured wiring.
That's the same way as that's the same way as a turnout, right? You've got the RJ45 runs out to the turnout. You've got a point there, and then it stars from there to the turnout controls or the signal control. So it is that idea, but it's the idea of that adaption. What's interesting about the adaption is on each location. In fact, I'll show you what, because it might be interesting. Let me put this up. We just finished this, so we're just working it. This is.
By the way, we're into religious wars here.
Said it was theological. So, and I'm afraid we're putting a bunch of atheists to sleep.
I was afraid that was going to be the next step.
Gee,
so
I had
anyway,
no idea that this was a South Bay tech group here.
So anyway, this is RJ45 standard wiring for pinouts and colors for through cables, and this maps that to those RJ14s for the signals. So one Cat5 can support 2 signal heads, or it can support a turnout with the motor and the sensing for inputs to CMRI, or basically we put 2 Cat5s, 2 RJ45s for a Chubb detector panel. And so basically what you've got at each place in the field, you've got this predefined mapping of how that Cat5 breaks up to that location. So in other words, this Cat5 only supports that one thing at the other end. And so it's really easy to troubleshoot. And the cool thing is you can unplug the Cat5 from the CRMI termination, plug it into a tester, and have push buttons and test everything. Right? So you can have a push button, you plug it in, and you've got 6 LEDs, and you can read the detectors. Or you plug in a tester to a turnout, and you can turn the turnout and run it back and forth, and you can see it change. So you can actually test both ends with testers very easily because the cables are always in between.
So no argument against using standard cables, standard pinouts, and standard conventions, regardless of whether it's, absolutely.
Yep. So, and I'm amazed how inexpensive Cat5 cable is. And
because model railroaders are using it everywhere and the prices come down.
Right. That's right. Actually, the one interesting thing is that, and we're going to try to retrofit this, if you're building a layout today, the other thing I would encourage thinking about is putting a cable tray in. Actually build a cable tray to lay cables in like we do. And, if you ever go into a data center, you see these metal trays, they're like this wide that have just a whole bunch of cables thrown in them. The idea of putting a 6-inch wide cable tray running all under your layout where you can just put a Cat5 in, you'll identify it at one end, put it in the tray, bring it out the other end, have it identified. You don't have to worry where it is in between because you got the 2 ends identified, but you've just got an easy way to run cabling instead of, putting it up with 1,000 zip ties to the bottom of the layout.
Well, I use ring runs. I got the old Teflon D-rings, although, if you want to do it inexpensively, shower curtain rings work pretty well.
Yep.
Because it'd be cool to have ironwork just because ironwork is cool, but...
cable trays take depth, and a lot of guys have multi-layer layouts, and you just don't want that extra depth. I agree doing what Seth is doing with the rings works great.
Yep.
I think this once again gets back to the fact that if you're going to build a layout, a modern layout nowadays is probably sectional is a really good way to go. Which is actually one reason why I haven't had to build a new layout from scratch, because all my previous layouts to the one I have in my bedroom right now were one piece that fits in only one unique location. And every time I started, along on this route, I had to move for work. So I've wound up tearing out 3 or 4 layouts in the past. And this time I went with 3 4-foot sections, by 2-foot sections that are sectional. And I haven't had to tear it out yet. Now I haven't made much progress, but at least I haven't had, it's still there.
Cool. Well, I think we beat the layout to death. Anybody got any interesting projects to show for the week?
Well, Phil, this is not a project, but I wanted to congratulate you on your Golden Spike Award, and also Dave Adams and Bob Osborne on their Achievement Awards.
Congratulations all. Cool. So anybody, any interesting modeling this week?
Well, I can show you a picture of this lower staging area, but I don't, it's not a week-long project.
Cool. Well, show us.
Do you guys see something?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. I've lost my view on the other screen here. There it is. Okay. Anyway, this is the lower staging area. You can see I've got all this junk left over in the room that I've been trying to figure out what to do with. Okay, so now advance a few. And this is what it looks like now. Okay. So I'm getting there. I just had a train running on this lower staging loop. And these will be 2 stacked loops to save a little bit of aisle space, because that was one of the major reasons to remodel this whole darn thing. So was to get better aisle space. And it's just been an adventure. You know, I hear you guys talking about all this, and I'm looking for a picture here that might have it, because this was not planned. I am putting panels here on the edge of the railroad where all the wiring goes, but I'm nowhere near what you guys are talking about with all this Cat6 and plugging things in. But, you know, it's getting there. And
I would suggest, Jim, if you can find Cat5 or 5E, it's actually a little easier, because Cat6 is twisted very, very tightly, and even 5E. So we don't go in anywhere near those speeds, and a little less twisting might be easier to work with. But anyway, keep going.
Yeah, I mean, that's Greek to me, Seth. You know that. You know, I know black and white.
Well, yeah, so the Cat5 cables, the difference in these cables is that as the speeds increased, you know, remember it started at 10 megabits. So Cat5 was 10 megabits, and then when it went to 100 megabits and gigabit, you went for 5E. And the difference is the tightness of the wires and the way they're made to handle those high speeds for networking. The reality is we're putting 99.9% of what we're putting across this is DC. It's just DC voltage. And you just need enough voltage to, I mean, if you literally look at a detector input, you're shorting out 5 volts that comes from the detector panel and shorting it to ground. I mean, basically the detector, the V out coming out of the detector panel, when it goes, it shorts the ground. On the other end, that pulls the pin to ground, which shorts the input, which tells you you've got an input. So it literally turns out all you need is the cheapest little wire to run there. That's why Cat5 is great, and it's cheap. The beauty of Cat5 is they still make a lot of it in China because they're set up to make it. Nobody wants to buy it because it's too damn slow. But for us, it doesn't matter. So we can just use the Cat5 and use the really inexpensive cables. And by the way, the key to it is there's a really good terminator where you can run the wire through and terminate the connectors and get a much easier to align it. Seth turned me on to that, I think. So yeah, it's we should probably put together some instruction, some thought process to communicate how to do that. Because like in your layout there, it'd be great, you know, Jim, to start thinking about doing this, you know, using that as a way to get back to wherever you want for any signaling, you know, any outputs like turnout controls or detectors or signaling controls. You know, as I've gotten into it, I'm really pretty impressed that if you do it right, we can make this a lot simpler to maintain down the road. And that to me is the biggie, is the maintenance thing. Just the idea that I got this cable plugs in here and this is my electronic intelligence. And I know on the other end of that plug, this wire goes to an LED. And it makes troubleshooting so much easier once everything is standardized.
Only one problem with that, Phil. Intelligence is not allowed on this property. So.
Well, yeah, but you have intelligence. You got a PC. It's intelligence, right? It's the.
As everyone who knows me knows that is a true statement. No,
hey, Jim, I had a question for you. Looking at that looked pretty good with the hidden staging there. I noticed you were using the hexagonal pieces to go around the curves. The other question I had for you is what gauge and what type of turnouts and turnout control are you using for the hidden part?
Right now it's HO. And what I'm using for the turnout controls now is that you guys are going to laugh at this. You're all talking about this new high-fangled electronics. I just was jumping for joy and shooting fireworks off that I actually wired up a couple of switch 8s for NCE. And I got them to work on the upper staging. And so now I'm wiring another switch 8 for the lower staging. But these are not the Mark IIs. These are the switch 8s that I bought probably 10 years ago and been sitting in a box. So that's where I am as far as electronics go. You can talk about these trays and connectors and, I know it's a cable. That's about the extent of it. I was very happy when you showed that RJ45 connector. I said, oh, that's what it looks like, So, yeah, I mean, this is a rebuild of the railroad, and I plan on getting something together for the convention for you guys, Phil. I should contact somebody for it. I've been taking a lot of pictures, and I think I can put together a pretty good slideshow of this thing. So by the way, Jim, for you and anyone else, if anyone would like to do something for the summer convention, send me an email and I'll help you put it together. And what we can do is run it on here as a dry run, in April, May, June. And what we'll do is we won't record it and put it up as a clinic. So it'll be new for the convention, but basically, you can put together a set of slides and come in and do a session here like Dave did. I think it's a great way for folks who've never done, I know there are a lot of folks members that have never done an online presentation, Dave, and you kind of look at it and you say, gee, do I want to do this? Do I want to put myself out there? Quite frankly, let me know. We'll help you go through it. Did it last week with George. We did 2 weeks ago with George. He had never done that before. He sent me the pictures and I put them together as a slide deck for him. So, we can do that and do it here. And then we'll go ahead and present it over to the convention guys. I know they're going to be looking for content to fill it out pretty quickly. And in fact, if you're interested, time is short because the convention folks need literally in the next month and a half to start getting content listings up on the site to encourage people. This is so different than a normal convention because in a normal convention, people sign up to go before they know there's a trust level that the content's going to be worth going to. The fact that we're doing a convention and there's going to be a charge for it instead of being free means people have to decide to sign up ahead of time. And to do that, they're going to want to have an idea, I think, of what they're signing up for and why it's more valuable than what they can get for free on the internet. And so if you're interested in doing something for the convention, Seth's involved. Send Seth an email, send me an email. I'll tell you, I think there's folks that will help you work it out to do a great presentation. And the cool thing is you can come in here on a Saturday in a very controlled, friendly environment and do a dry run and figure out what you don't know and what doesn't work well. So yeah, if anyone's interested in that, and by the way, Jim, I think, how to build hidden staging and go through it. It's a learning experience and people learn very much from people doing those kind of presentations. So anyone who's interested in that, send me an email, send Seth an email, and we'll work with you and get you on here to do it. We have a lot of, there are a lot of things you see from people that are pretty amazing, on these sessions, and kind of formalizing it for the convention would be great. Yeah. Hey, Guy, you were asking about the helix part or the choice of it. I was looking for another picture here. You can see behind me here, this is a railroad that runs around my office. Mm-hmm. And I mapped it out in CAD and I thought, every other time I built something, I did the cookie cutter. And by the time I got done doing all this cookie cutting, I had so much leftover plywood that was just, you know, everywhere, that I really started looking at it. And I thought, if I can cut straight chunks into like a, you know, four-sided shape, I can put them together. And it worked out really well in the office here. So I took it out there. Here's, and, you know, I had all this leftover plywood from building sheds and stuff, which was another plus. So I'm trying to figure out how to get rid of all this stuff. So if that makes sense at all, let's see. Okay, so here's a couple pictures of the helix working in here. I was able to take all this stuff outside and work on it outside on a big, you know, 4x8 sheet of plywood. You know, you talk about making everything movable. Well, I found out that after I built it, I almost couldn't get it in the door. So I had my valiant helper, my wife, out there helping me drag it in about 10 o'clock at night before it was going to rain. I was using Loctite. I was using Loctite to put this stuff down. And if you've never used Loctite, it holds pretty well, but it's really hard to adjust as you go. So I had to fix a little kink. I was looking, I just uploaded. This is pretty much what the finished helix looks like, and it's off in the corner now. So I don't have anything prepared, so I'm just flipping through pictures.
Yeah, so whose law is it, Jim? You can never have too many bar clamps.
Yeah, that is definitely going to be one of the questions in the presentation. I was out there. You can see I've got the 12-inch clamps. I have some 24-inch clamps. I have some screw clamps. I was trying C clamps. And I lucked out because I went outside and I found one that I'd stuck somewhere on a sawhorse, and it's all I needed. So I actually had one extra clamp when this was all done. So,
so Jim, that's a great way to make a helix. You don't waste all that plywood. The only thing I'd add is for a few bucks you can get a biscuit cutter, and then do that that keeps them aligned. It makes it easy. You don't necessarily need such huge splice plates underneath either.
Yeah, that is the one thing that I did find that I did master well. You can't see it on here, but under each one of these is a joint. This is 1/2-inch plywood, and underneath there is like a 1/8 inch piece of plywood with screws coming up into it and glue. And as I tried to move this thing, I found out it was not very stable. Okay, so let's see if I can get to the finished thing here now. That's another thing about presentations. They're always fun when you're trying to find things. But this is the helix now over in the corner. So you can see that it's been beefed up. Last time we picked it up, these are little protecting rails. I had bought a bunch of, I guess it's called hardboard with holes in it to make tool hangs. And it's been sitting in the garage for probably 10 years because I used up what I needed and I still had a bunch of it left over. So I wound up ripping it and using it as a shield on the inside and outside. And now this thing is in the corner and you could pick it up. You could kick it. You could probably run over it with an F-150 and it wouldn't, you know, it would hold up. So my next task today is to get out there and connect this thing. So should be fun.
That's exciting. It's really great to see the project process and the projects.
Yeah. It is exciting to get out there. I was being really tough on myself saying I need to get out there and do more. And I just came up with the idea that, you know, any progress is good, you know, so. Okay. So now how do you stop sharing, guys?
It's up at the top, and I went ahead and stopped you sharing. Here, I'll share one picture. This was your bar clamp.
There you go.
This is a module we were building. It's actually for one of the ON30 guys in his garage. This is actually as a module. It's about 8 by 8 feet. But this was clamping the fascia boards on. So lots of clamps.
Spring clamps too. When Osh was on Discount City as they were going out of business, I rushed over to get as many spring clamps and cheap clamps as possible. You never have enough.
Yeah, it's like when you're walking through Home Depot in the holiday season and they've got all those boxes up at the front there. You know, it's like clamps.
Okay. So I'm going to share one little modeling. I got to turn my background. My background's going to goof this up.
We get to see the real Phil.
Yeah. So that looks like a fake background too, Phil.
It does. It does. So this is an acrylic building that I think I showed you guys before. So it's actually painted now. I want to show you a couple of things. So this is the roof with lighting. When I'm twisted out of the way. These are actually all 3D printed. They're 3D printed channels. I don't know if you can see them, that actually the wiring runs in, and you can see the wires come out of the ends of these channels, and they run down here. And what I do is I don't know if you can see that there's a piece of 26 gauge copper wire wrapped around that end point. And so basically the power path for the lighting is from one side to the other side across the roof. And then I found at Michael's these little brass plates. You can see them up here at the top. And they had they were like name plates. And I bent this up. This was like a round connection here, kind of ground the top to match, and cut a little slot in there. And then they're soldered to this piece of wire that runs down under the floor, comes out at the bottom, and is soldered onto this connector that connects to the layout. So basically, when you drop the roof in, it makes the lighting connection and the lighting turns on.
So how did you, for the lamps themselves, how did you extract the wire out through the center of the hole to get the lamps connected?
So the lamp wires actually, I should have taken a picture of this before I did it. The lamp wires actually run, this channel here is a 3D printed channel and basically has a cut all the way down it that the wires run through. And basically anywhere where there are the connections here, I actually made a hole through and made it solid. And let's see if you can see here, because if you kind of look back across here, right here, see that little black dot right there? That's actually the resistor for that string of lights. So basically these 4 lights are just wired in series with a 230 ohm resistor to balance them. So basically the 12 volts gets spread across the 4 lights. So you get 3 volts on a light. The 230 ohm resistor just protects them from voltage surges. So basically the 2 strings of lights just go across 12 volts.
Okay, so that's U channel. It's not a block.
It's not. Yeah, this is actually a U channel that I printed. It's basically just a design that's an extended piece with a U channel in it with the lights coming out the ends. And then the other thing I did, I think is kind of interesting. So I put a track in the bottom, and because of that, I had to raise the floor. So these floors are actually attached to a piece of plexiglass. And I decided I wanted to put some rails in for a transfer to make it look like you had to transfer out. So I just took a couple of rails and epoxied them to the plexiglass. And now I've epoxied the wood to the plexiglass. So this wood now, these 2 pieces, I can take out, and I'm going to do all the finishing and the detailing off the model and then glue them in and then do the walls and the wall studs and that after I get done. So it's kind of an interesting way of building it, because the framing of the building was already all done. And the other thing, I don't know if you can notice, I was going to use paper, but I decided it didn't look good. So this is actually 1/32 wood interior. And then what I'm going to do is glue on the walls here horizontal battens, horizontal stringers to glue for the battens to nail to, and then horizontal posts. So it'll have framing inside when you look into it. And this is basically, because again, it's 1/8" plexiglass. The frame of the building is 1/8" plexiglass. So this is a mullion just set on the outside, and I haven't cleaned the glass yet, but that's basically what the outside looks like. So you see a little bit of the wood inside through because of the thickness of the wall. But once you put the roof on it, the thickness of the wall really is not very noticeable.
You could actually print a photo on something self-adhesive and do one of your photo backdrops inside there. Yep. For looking through the window, that'd probably be adequate.
Well, yeah, exactly. It's very open when you look in through the side, because it's a module, when you're sitting looking at this, your head is literally, this far away. And so if you look in, you kind of see up through, inside, and I think it'll look pretty reasonable. But anyway.
Oh, yeah. Nice.
I thought the idea of
Nothing
having
like
the lighting in the roof and the roof drop in was kind of an interesting way of doing it versus originally I was going to put a connector plug on it, but I just didn't want to be trying to do that and hold everything. I thought just dropping it in would make a lot more sense. Anyway, that was my work for the week.
And you know those copper tubes you have going up the side looks like plumbing. So if you look at it, you can see it anywhere. So
yep.
That was cool.
Well, that in the 3D printed building, I'm doing the same thing. I'm running basically brass tubes up, but there I've 3D printed kind of a carrier to carry it. And then the wiring on that one is going to run positive on one side of the building, negative on the other side. And then the trusses carry the power across to where the lights are. So it's really interesting that if you think about electrical power in our modeling for all this stuff, if you divide it into plus and minus and distribute it separately in the building, I think you can make it look a lot more realistic than if you run individual wires to each light. So when I get the 3D printed building done, hopefully I'll have it done the next couple of weeks, or at least assembled. I'll bring it in and show it as well.
Say, Phil, I think that maybe you and Seth ought to consider on one of these Saturday mornings to actually do a segment on wires and wire connectors. I'll be sending you some information, but on this crazy bridge that I'm trying to work out, I've come up with a very, to me, it's a crazy way of getting electrical power across a real 36-inch doorway. And it's well, I'll do some photos, but it's
cool.
The bridge lifts up and pivots, you know, it's crazy. So in any event, though, something on wiring would really be helpful.
Yeah, like I said, I think putting together something about, you know, structured wiring and that for the convention, something that Seth and I should probably work on. But I think, you know, what I love is like that. Somebody comes up with a way of doing something and you see it and then you remember it. And then when you come to something in the future, you remember it and you do it that way. It's that's what I like is you file away all these hints.
Maybe we'll do like Dave Connery and keep a notebook of hints.
Yeah. There seems to be a quiet down here. Hey, Guy, thank you so much. I see you working on your car there, and it made me think of something I wanted to ask you guys. This is a Kato SD45. You can see it has handrails on one side, but nothing else on the other. Well, this was bought at a swap meet. It's one of these guys. I show it the camera. Anybody have any handrail sets sitting around in their garage that they want to get rid of? Kato has told me that they don't have any plans on producing them in the near future. My other question for you guys is, anybody know whether Athearn handrails will work on a Kato model? Uh-oh. Silence is not golden.
You could build a jig and do it with 015 brass wire.
Yeah, that's my next step. I figure I'm going to buy some Athearn. I'll buy an Athearn rail kit and see if it works. And then we'll go from there.
Well, the good news is
with wire set, then I've got to paint it and everything else. So
the good news is if you've got one set of handrails, you can use those to make a jig pretty easily.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's more the ends, you know, so it's more the handrails and, you know, all the other little pieces that come with it. So, but yeah, I don't know what I'd ask. I've asked a couple other places. I've tried Just Trains, you know, and they looked around, they thought, oh, I know just where to get it. And then I said, well, you know, I've looked on the internet too, you know.
Any old stuff, Details West or some of those guys?
Yeah, I mean, you know, they were searching for me and they couldn't find it either. So, you know, that's why I threw it out to you guys to see if somebody just happens to have a box sitting around with stuff laying in it. So
you might try HO Swap Meet. Ask on there if somebody's got it.
Is that a website or a?
It's a group, IO group, and it's basically you know, you just put stuff up for trade or swap. But on Wednesdays they have a, you know, post it and ask if, you know, if somebody's got something you need. So it's a thought, and there's a lot of diesel modelers on that group.
Yeah, and is that that's the name of it? HO Swap Meet? What is it? A Facebook?
Yeah. It's a group like an old Yahoo group, whatever the new name is. IO. I don't know what the new. They all transitioned a couple years ago. I don't keep track, but
IO groups. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Cool. Look at that.
This is this week's work.
Oh, beautiful.
On the Port Costa station. The freight house has been completed pretty much. And this is actually just an illustration board wall that I'm making sure that I have the right positioning for the windows. Because I don't have any plans. I'm just working pretty much straight from photos and drawing it up and then working out the actual spacing and so forth. But this is part of the Port Costa layout that I've been working on. So that's this week.
Cool.
Is that a scratch build that you're doing?
Oh yeah, totally scratched. There's no kits for this one, believe me.
It's beautiful.
Interesting enough, for the engine house, there was a Banta kit that actually is. I bought the kit and then I built a mock-up based on the kit structure, simply because I'm never going to get to the detailed kit with all its internal framing and everything else for a while. So I just decided I'd build another illustration board mock-up.
Very nice work.
Thank you.
And we've got to all convince Kim that he needs to take a bunch of pictures and do a talk here on a Saturday for
us. Actually, if anybody wants to see, there's a blog spot. I don't know if you know, like it's the same location where Tony puts his SP trains, blogspot.com, srndsp.blogspot.com, and I post about once a month out there with all sorts of pictures.
Cool.
The other thing too is working on the correct shade of colonial yellow.
I'm guessing you could start probably a little flame war on a couple of chat groups about it.
As I say, that's always a good war.
You know, that's an interesting question. The color of something that was only photographed in black and white. I mean, it's a
I was fortunate that there were a couple of shots of similar buildings in color from the 1950s. What the shade of colonial yellow, but then again, every location weathered differently.
Right.
Well, and locations bought paint locally.
And no, nobody brought paint locally for the SP.
Oh, okay.
It all came out of central shops.
The other question is, did they change over time as the vendors changed?
Yeah. For instance, you'll notice here on the freight house, on an earlier one, you would have seen the corner posts also done in freight brown. But by the 1950s, they were painting it just the whole building one color. And the photos I have of this building, such as this, show that it had been, by the time this was painted in the 1950s, it had been the simpler scheme was used with a lot less trim color.
Cool.
I spent a lot of time on research and digging in old photos and things like that. And to me, this is being one of those, you know, as you call those types of model railroaders. I'm a modeler. That's my interest. And given that I have really an entire layout, that's it.
You went way too fast for us to scrutinize the railroad.
That's right. That's why we need all those pictures and the time.
Hey, would Guy show us whatever it is he's been working on the whole session? I mean, every so often we see a little bit of Guy's face and part of what looks like a flat car.
Okay. So,
I'm sorry,
Nice.
Guy. I muted you. I was going to spotlight you. I hit the wrong button. My fault.
there we go. All right. So I don't know how much you can see. This is a flat car. I'm building, let's see, I'm building about 14 flat cars right now. This one is one that Jack Burgess 3D printed all of the black material there. And then I put a, you know, weathered wood deck on it and weathered the side of it, installing the grab irons and the stake pockets, which is what I've been drilling since I've been talking to you guys. By the way, at the Layout Design Ops SIG, I did a bunch of other stuff last week. And there's two other forms of this. One of them is some Eric Bracker kits that I bought I'm sorry, this is actually the scratch-built version, shorty flat cars, and quick and dirty underneath. And then the other version is Eric Bracker did some kits years ago. And I finally got around to building them. You know how you buy stuff because you think it's cool and it sits for days and days and days. So those are, once again, kind of hard to see, but that's what's going on. So that's the current step. Like we were talking about with Dave Connery earlier, whether you build models or whether you work on the layout. Right now I'm building a bunch of flat cars to fill in an operating hole that I have. So that's what I've been working on.
Guy, what do you use for staining on those surfaces? They look nice.
So the top, the wood surface is basically just alcohol and shoe dye, and I think I'm using Lincoln shoe dye these days. It varies from batch to batch, and then the paint on the side is Tuscan red that's been scratched back. That's probably pretty hard to see, but that's pretty much the moves.
Thank you.
So, by the way, I went to buy some alcohol-based shoe dye from Amazon, and apparently they're not shipping that to California anymore.
Oh, really?
So it seems to be an issue with Prop 65, the same reason Menards is not shipping certain kits to California. So we may need to all get together and send our representatives a letter about why we can't buy certain things in California. It doesn't make sense that alcohol-based shoe dye, I mean, the only thing I can think is maybe they think kids are going to buy it and get drunk on it, which to me is kind of one of those Darwin things. If that...
Isn't it usually because the product just isn't labeled with a Prop 85 warning?
Oh, maybe that's it. Maybe that's
it. It's just the manufacturer didn't put a Prop 85 warning label in.
Maybe that's it. It's maybe that simple.
Can we maybe redesignate the Coast Division area to include some place in Nevada so we can send everything there?
Well, we have Hawaii. Hawaii is part, and you can ship to Hawaii.
Yeah, but shipping to Hawaii and back.
Yeah, that's time consuming. But we have a couple of guys in Reno who are quite happy to do.
All of Nevada is Coast Division.
I used to work for Crowley, and we did shipments back and forth between San Francisco, Alameda, and Hawaii on barges with tugs. You want to talk about slow? But it was the household goods contract for the Navy personnel.
That's right. Well, I think that probably brings us to the end of our session today. We will plan on 2 weeks from now. I'm looking, by the way, for content. So a couple of folks, if you're interested in doing something in a couple of weeks, be great. One last comment. I was going to do this earlier and didn't. My wife pushed me on Monday. I live in Pleasanton and go to Valley Care, which is our local hospital associated with Stanford. My wife pushed me on Monday, and I went online, and I got an appointment for Palo Alto to get the vaccine in about a week and a half. My wife, who turned 65 in December, went online and got vaccinated yesterday. So if you haven't, if you're, 65, if you're turning 65 this year or older, go try to sign up, because you can sign up now and get it. And, my hope is that if we can get enough of us signed up, it'll actually allow us to start having activities sooner, is kind of my hope. Doing the same thing in the clubs and that. So again, if you haven't gone for it, go try. I think you can get it. Yeah. And Jesse and Ken, I think both showed their certificates. That's, it's kind of the star. We all need a star on your shirt now.
A hypodermic.
A big
hypodermic for having been vaccinated. But anyway, it's just, the good news is, for all the talk in the press about how bad things are going, it seems like if you're in the group now, you can go get it and sign up and get it pretty quickly. So with that, I guess if there's anyone else have anything else they'd like to share, or.
I have to agree with what you just said, that I happened to log on last Friday, and I got a shot on Wednesday, and my first shot at Berger Drive in Santa Clara County, because they opened it at 65. And my girlfriend's Kaiser, and she couldn't get anything until Friday night. So she's going to get shot at the fairgrounds on Tuesday or Wednesday. And so you're right. They started prioritizing people 65. And if you're computer savvy enough to log on to this meeting, you're computer savvy enough to probably find in your county where you can go as a 65-year-old, if you're lucky enough to be 65 or older.
And Alameda, by the way, they're setting up at the county fairgrounds in Pleasanton to do vaccinations. I think they may be starting next week.
Yeah.
So there are lots of options. It's just, good news is, hopefully if enough of us get it, we can get rid of this stuff
someday.
Dr. Costa is doing it at DVC.
Yep.
I'm pretty sure there's I'm not sure if the right name, but it's called My Turn. You can sign up for there, and they'll give you a notice when you're eligible and where.
So. Another site is Vaccinate California, Vaccinate CA, and that's how I stumbled on the thing last Friday night. It got me to Santa Clara County website for Santa Clara County, and so that's how I found it.
It turns out the eligibility is 50 miles from each site.
All right.
Santa Clara has a bunch of sites available in the county.
Yeah. Is anybody else shocked by what the news shows of people lining up for miles and miles? And we aren't seeing that here, so.
One thing, if you are a Kaiser member, you may need to go outside Kaiser to get a vaccination.
They weren't taking Kaiser people until Wednesday of this week out of Kaiser, but they are in Santa Clara County, and I think everywhere in the state, because there are 9 million Kaiser members, and I guess in California, that's too big a pool. Anyway,
actually, for Kaiser, you just need to know how to play the system.
Yeah.
If you go through their COVID website and you tab down until you get to the screen where you're just asking for additional information, and then you ask for an e-consultation and you put in vaccination, my daughter was able to go to trail through all of these connections and get me an appointment up in Sacramento 4 or 5 days after she was able to log on, because it brought back all of the Kaiser sites in Northern California that had vaccinations going on, and you just found one that had a appointment time that you could handle. I had to do mine in Sacramento, but it was no big deal.
I had, and I used to I worked for 10 years for Kaiser, and in administration and doing their budget for Northern Cal. And My only thing is that they really haven't been able to get a handle on how to vaccinate even their over 75s, let alone their over 65s. I went outside. I went through the Contra Costa County Health System, which had a nice little website where I could register and get a sign up. And I wound up, I had to go to Antioch, which 20 miles is not a big deal. And it worked fine. And it's interesting. The number of people who they had it, really scheduled it out. So you only showed up if you had an appointment.
Well, all I got to say is you guys got to hurry up so us people under 65 can start getting vaccinated.
Absolutely.
People under 65, they're disposable.
Oh.
It doesn't take that long to make more of them.
They're still capable of making more.
The way you've got to say it is there's lots of people growing into that role. But actually, I hate to say this, but I actually would really prefer that they would prioritize all the teachers first.
Yep.
Vaccinate all the teachers so we can get over this controversy of going back to school, so all the teachers are comfortable going back to school, because I just worry about our kids. I mean, a year not in school is tough.
Yeah. There's just not enough vaccine yet.
Yeah.
It's really the tragedy is that we need 10 times the vaccine that we have right now available right now.
Well, I guess I can throw opinions out there all day long, but there's people who are a lot smarter about this than I am, and I listen to them. So, if they say we should do this group first, we should do that group first, and we should follow the plan. So,
yeah.
And I keep saying that to many parents.
I can tell you as a teacher who's teaching over Zoom all week, it is a huge pain in the ass. And anybody who has kids who are having to learn over Zoom, I feel for you. It's going to be a lost year. I don't think we should do anything different. I mean, there's not much you can do, but it is very unfortunate what's happened to that.
Would it make sense for us to just kind of say the whole year should be a mulligan? And, if you think you've learned something, you can test out, but everybody, basically it's Groundhog Year,
I don't know.
We don't do mulligans in education.
The problem is you have another group of kids coming in every year.
Yeah.
So you kind of have to, unfortunately, the way the system is structured, just investment in classroom numbers and teacher numbers and that, everybody moves forward every year. And so you can't hold that whole class back because you got another group of kids coming in, pushing up in each class. So,
and you've got 16 years or 17 years from K through the 4 years of college, moving through that.
Yep.
Well, but you can certainly gap year after high school without too much disruption. But I mean, you're quite right. We'd have to come up with an extra year of classrooms, but this really seems silly.
I had a gap year after my master's degree and got drafted.
Happily, we don't have that this time.
My view on this is that we're kind of wasting our time saying, well, we can catch everybody up. You should.
Oh, that's silly. It's not going to happen.
Yeah. You're not going to know.
Well, and I think the problem is it's disproportional, right? So there are probably X percentage of the kids that this had no impact on their academic learning, depending on the kid, the environment they were learning in, their parents, et cetera. Then there's a percentage that it had some impact. Then there's a percentage that it's not just a lost year. They lost stuff they had before that. I mean, and guys here, I mean, my hearing from teachers is, 20 to 30% of the kids just don't show up anymore. And, that's kind of the challenge is, when the parents are working outside the home, the kid's home alone and they decide not to go to class, there's just not much you can do anymore. So unfortunately, I think there's the 20 to 30% that we may be losing, and it may be more than just losing a year.
Yeah.
because it loses the continuity that keeps them going. And it may be very hard for them, that group, to ever catch back up, which could be very dissuading to continuing education, unfortunately, for that group. And
that's why the idea of catching up really needs to be examined.
Right.
And there's another spectrum too to this, is that there's a lot of other things that kids are learning that they didn't learn before. So the spectrum of what a kid needs to know today should change too.
Yep.
You know, you're filling out a report card and you're looking at it, go, we didn't do that, but we did this, and that's not on the report card.
Right.
So, you know, how we look at this really needs to be looked at. And unfortunately, education is not real fast and nimble of going, oh yeah, you're right. So
okay, guys, it's my time allotted is for modeling is coming up.
Yeah, hey,
Okay.
I think we're at that time.
More wiring and things like that. I am interested in that. I just don't want to become an EE to wire my railroad. So
as an EE, I can appreciate that opinion.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, this is supposed to be fun, and I find it fun. Last night I was wiring my return loop, and I put the plug on, and the little red light started flashing, and I went, crap. And it is a loop. And I went back, I started tracing it, and Steve, you know me, I'm having a great time. I'm like, at least I know what to do. And I went back tracing what I did, and when I was putting the feeder wires on the track, it's a loop. So the white wire is supposed to be on the inside, the black is supposed to be on the outside. Well, I got to one spot, and of course, what did I do? I put the white wires on the outside and the black wires on the inside. So I wound up switching that and took care of the problem. So, I mean, I was shooting fireworks off last night going, God, I solved this damn thing, you know?
You aren't keeping
by the way,
up.
Jim, the real tip on that is buy yourself a alerting voltometer. They have ones where it'll actually alert a tone, and you can set it up on the measuring the ohms resistance. You clip it to the two rails and just let it sit there. And if when you're putting your leads on, you actually will short them out if you're doing that. And because you every time you attach a lead on, it'll short out, and then you'll hear the tone.
Yeah,
I learned that, by the way, doing the module that I did. Because I wired all of the feeder wires and all the turnouts on the workbench and then fed them through. And you have to remember which way the turnout goes in to the polarity of the wires in the module. And one of them, I just wired it backwards. I was, clearly it was in the evening and I'd had a glass of wine and I wasn't paying enough attention. And when I put it in the layout, I wired the black wire to the black and the red. And when I went back to find that, everything looked perfect, but I had to figure out, oh, these are actually wired backwards. And it was exactly, and it took me 2 hours to figure it out. And that was, I went out and bought a Vohm that has the sound alert on it, and I used it from then on.
Yeah, I think my big mistake is I should have gone from the power source out, and I didn't. I went from the farthest point away and started wiring back to the power source.
But again, as long as you put the wires on there, it doesn't matter because it'll tell you the minute you short it out.
Yeah, I would have seen the LED. Yeah.
Yep.
But, there's a fear of electricity here.
An analog solution is to put black tape and white tape along your rail before you start doing your drops. And then, drill your holes for the drops and put the colored wire through there. You can do that without a voltmeter, but on reverse loops particularly, that's what I handle the problem.
I went and I looked and I checked and I looked and I checked. I looked and I checked. And then, of course, something got in the way and, you tripped or you found something else. It got, taken to a side. And I was just happy. I knew exactly what was wrong. So it was like, I just had to go find it. So
please take this in jest. But you're supposed to be using red and black, not white and black.
Well, you get to set your own scheme, right?
Kidding.
Rule number one.
Number one, right.
From the first railroad, I went down to Al Lasher's, and the guy said, hey, we have some really cool wire here. For $1, you can get like 8 different colors. And my original wiring scheme was light colors and dark colors.
Well, that's like the Pleasanton Club. So I was told that someone donated a whole bunch of black wire. And so everything was wired with black wire.
Oh,
there's no polarization. I mean, literally both wires running out are black.
It's Bachman's wiring.
And nothing was ever labeled. So yeah, it's you know, sometimes that free stuff that creates a complication later may not be worth the freeness of it.
Right. And you gotta remember what system you're using, whether it's white to the wall or black in the back.
Yep.
Yeah. But we learn, you know.
Totally, but we learn.
All right, guys, I'm going to say goodbye. Thanks.
Big fun. Thank you, guys.
I think we're going to call it a day.
Thanks,
Everyone
Phil.
have a great week. We'll see you all in 2 weeks. Thanks much.
Thanks, Phil. Great job.
Enjoy. Bye now.
Hey.